Receptions and details. This is a topic I am very excited to talk about because it can be such a challenge. You're dealing with low light, a lot of very fast and short events like the bouquet toss and garter toss, the cake cutting, the dances, the details and the food that if you don't get right away, the guests will ruin, the grand exit, and so much more. So in this video, we'll be talking about it all, which will hopefully make shooting receptions a lot easier for you. First things first, preparation. What should you prepare for? Depending on the length of the reception, I usually will bring about 2 to 3 extra fully charged batteries for my camera. I also bring the charger just in case. I've used it before. For a full day of shooting, I go through about 2 to 3 batteries. As for card space, I use the 1DX, which shoots stupidly large files, so I have a 0.5 terabyte CFast 2.0 card, which costs about $700. If you don't shoot on the 1DX, a 256 gigabyte card should be great for you. Like on the Sony a7 III, the file sizes are about 5 times smaller, so a 256 gigabyte SD card would work just great. As for camera equipment, as I've mentioned, I shoot my weddings on my Canon 1DX Mark II. As for lens choice, I typically keep my lens a prime lens, like the 35 or 50mm. These lenses to me are able to get everything that I need to, even small detail shots like the ring. First thing you're going to want to do when you show up to the reception is capture details. I would recommend showing up at least an hour early so that the venue is empty and untouched, allowing you to get shots of the decorations, the food, and everything else without people in the background ruining it. A lot of the details probably have special meaning to the couple. Remember, the bride probably spent some good money on all those details, so make sure you capture that as much as you can. So before we dive into the events of the reception, I want to give you guys some tips and tricks for how I capture details. And for me, it comes down to one word: depth. When I see a detail that I like, I look for depth. Meaning, I want something as foreground to my subject, the detail, and something in my background to my subject. This will help the detail come to life and add some beautiful depth to the scene. Now, this is just a personal preference to me. I prefer the depth look. There are other times when I love the head-on shot, mainly for cakes or other things, but adding depth to me elevates the detail. It turns a not so cinematic image into something beautiful. Sometimes I'll even grab leaves and hold them in front of my camera barely as I'm shooting something just to create beautiful depth. Lighting. A big problem that occurs in just about every reception is lighting. The sun goes down, the mood is typically meant to be intimate and dark, and that makes it hard for us videographers. So there are 2 solutions. Ideally, you'd use both. First, a low aperture lens, and second, invest in some good lights. The lower your aperture can go, the more light it can let in. So when I shoot receptions, I use my Canon 35mm 1.4 because it does the best in low light. If you're using something like the Canon 24-70mm 2.8 or 24-105 f4, you'll struggle a lot more because you'll be letting in less light. As for lights, I use the Core SWX Torch LED lights, which are bicolored and very bright. I have 3 of them that I like to set on tripods out of everyone's way to light my scene. I personally like to have one of my lights behind my subject to give them a gorgeous backlight, and then one on the front side of them to light up their faces. It's also important to match your light temperature with the temperature of the ambient lighting. Learn your color temperatures so that it becomes a quick and easy setup during the reception. I highly recommend investing in lights. I did it for the first year of my business and it resulted in some grainy and dark footage. Invest in your business and people will invest in you. Alright, so let's talk about the main events that happen during the reception. But before we do, what do you film during the downtime? Typically at most receptions, there are periods of time when you're waiting around for the events to start. You've already filmed the details, so now what? My advice would be to chill. Relax, breathe, make sure your equipment is all set up for the next event. Your settings are all dialed in, you know where the bride is, and you're ready to go. Don't be afraid of downtime. Usually there's a dinner before the reception. A lot of videographers like to film the guests eating. I personally do not. I've learned that the guests don't like a camera in their face as they eat the food, especially in slow motion. Unless the bride specifically asked me to film people while they eat, I don't. I just focus on the food and the couple and the details. When the dinner starts, once the bride and the groom sit down with their food, so do I. I tell the couple that I eat when they do, or else I'll miss the events before and after. This gives me a good 50 minutes to eat before the toasts usually start. Which brings me to the toasts. Before the wedding, communicate with the couple if they want the toast and the speeches at their wedding recorded. If yes, plan accordingly. Typically at every reception, they have a DJ with a sound system, and they pass a mic around to each person giving the speech. Just follow the same instructions in the ceremony audio video to hook your recorder up to the box in order to capture the audio. If there isn't a DJ with an audio audio box, you can either love up each person giving a speech or just sit really close to them and point your mic directly at them. Even if the bride doesn't care about the speeches being recorded, you should anyway. You never know what will be said, and if you want to use the speeches in the video or sell the raw footage to the bride afterwards, which happens to me often. I shoot the speeches and toast at 24 frames per second, and if possible, I have one camera pointing directly at the person giving the speech and another camera pointed directly at the bride and the groom to capture their reaction. The first dances. There are typically 3 first dances that happen during the reception: the bride and the groom, the daddy-daughter dance, and the mother and son dance. When filming these dances, I'm looking for 3 things: emotion, aesthetic, and variance. Emotion. I want to capture those shots of the bride wiping away a tear, or the mom or the dad getting emotional, or the bride being spun by her husband, anything of that nature. Moments that really capture the essence of their wedding day. Aesthetic, meaning what angle looks best. When the dances start, I let the photographer know that I'm going to do a 360 spin around the dance floor and film the bride and the groom so I can know what angle I like best. And during that 360 rotation, I'm looking for the best angle to stick to. Are there distracting guests behind the couple? Are there beautiful lights behind them? Which angle shows the best scene of the reception while still keeping the couple the focus? Once I find my angle, I usually just stick to it. Which brings me to variance, meaning getting a variety of shots from that angle. When using a prime lens like the 35mm, you're stuck to one focal length, which I love because it forces you to get creative. It forces me to think about the best places to be to get different shots. I'll back up and get a wide shot of the dance floor and the couple, maybe some mid shots of them holding hands while dancing, things like that. I try and get as many different shots of the scene because you can cut between wide, medium, and tight shots to keep the video more engaging once you start editing. And for these, I recommend recording as much as possible. I feel like every time I decide to put my camera down for 3 seconds, that's when the groom decides to spin his bride, and I miss it. So always be recording. Cake cutting, bouquet, and garter toss. For me, these 3 events all fall under the same category. The bride and the groom are standing still, doing an event, and your job is to capture the best angle of that event. With weddings, the events of the day happen so fast and do not get repeated. So over time, learn how to capture the event as it's happening, but from as many angles as possible. For example, when the bride and the groom are cutting the cake, I like to start at a medium shot to capture them and the cake. After a few seconds, I'll get closer to get some tight shots of their faces, typically as they are laughing. Then I'll move over to the side to get a shot of them with their hands on the knife, slicing through the cake. And then I'll end up back at the medium shot when they feed the cake to each other. So learn how to move quickly, which is another perk of shooting everything in 60 FPS. I know in my head that all I need is at least 3 seconds of usable footage, because in the editing room, that will convert to 6 seconds, which is more than enough time. The bouquet and garter toss. You shouldn't need more than one camera for this, but if you do, get creative with it. I've almost always used just one. For the bouquet toss, the bride will face away from her bridesmaids and toss her bouquet backwards in the air, and then a random girl will catch it. Before the bride throws the flowers, I like to pump up the bridesmaids and tell them to get a little competitive for the video, and then I'll back up to in front of the bride with the bridesmaids behind her. The bride will lower the bouquet and then toss it behind her, and you can either follow the flowers or just go right to the bridal party. I tend to just go right to the bridesmaids and look for where the flowers land. Once a bridesmaid catches it, I stick with her the whole time until after her and the bride celebrate. For the garter toss, I move around a lot more. I create a 180-degree movement so I can capture 2 things: the bride reacting to her husband going up her dress, and 2, the groom going up her dress and coming back out victorious with the garter. The groom will usually just stand up and flick the garter over to his competitive groomsman. I like to stand on the side so I can capture him firing it off, and then whip my camera over to the groomsman, who will be lunging for the garter. And like the bouquet toss, I'll stick with the man who caught it until he and the groom are done celebrating. Dance parties. This part of the video is meant to be fun, exciting, hype, entertaining. Sometimes I film dance parties where none of those things were happening, but with creative shooting and editing, you can make the party look off the chain. I like to switch my frame rate to 24 FPS during the dance parties because I don't plan on slowing down the footage in post. No need for a crazy party to be slow and dreamy. I also like to change my lens to a 20mm and get as close as I can to people. It gives that club vibe, and I love that look, but I'll still shoot a lot of it on my 35 or 50mm. Also, when filming dance parties, I personally remove my camera from my GlideCam or stabilizer. GlideCams are bulky and dangerous in crowds. I can't count the number of children who have rammed their head into the bottom of my GlideCam. So I like to go handheld and get as many cool shots as I can. And the handheld look footage usually adds to the hype and club style of the video. But you can leave yours on, sometimes I do, it's just up to you. It's your lawsuit. As for lighting, I try to shoot into the light. I love the lens flares and the light shining through the crowd as they dance. Again, it gives that party vibe. Last but not least, the grand exit. This part is always tricky for me, no matter how many times I've done it. Every wedding is different, but for me, 80% of the time, I shoot sparkler exits. They'll hand out 50 or so sparklers to the guests, and once everyone is lined up on both sides, they'll light all the sparklers. And once the sparklers are lit, the couple will walk down the aisle. This is tricky for a couple of reasons. I can't adjust my color temperature or exposure until the sparklers are lit, and the couple likes to run out right when they're lit to avoid missing the sparkler's short lifespan. So you gotta be quick about adjusting your colors and your settings. I like to film a detail shot of the sparklers being lit in order to 1, get B-roll, and 2, adjust my settings. Typically my Kelvin is anywhere from 2500 to 3500 depending on the sparklers, but I'll use my color balance to pump more blue into it if it's still too red and orange. I coordinate with the photographer on the best angles to get. Typically we stand in the middle, shoulder to shoulder, and walk backwards with the couple, or we wait at the end and capture them walking down. One of us will yell at them to stop and kiss if they don't already, and we'll make sure that we both capture it. Then if they have a getaway vehicle, we'll film them getting inside. When they're driving away, I always go to the bride's side because more times than not, she likes to lean her head out the window and wave goodbye. And there you go. That is my process for shooting a reception. Main things to remember: look for depth. Depth creates an aesthetic and helps your footage look more cinematic. Coordinate with the photographer so you both can be at the same place, same time with the best possible angle. Follow the bride and the groom around and capture everything and anything that you know will make for a good shot in the video. Again, the more you film receptions, the easier it will be, and the more confident you'll be with the schedule and where to be. That's it for filming receptions. You guys can check out the virtual job shadows for Parker and I filming receptions, and if you guys have any further questions, please let us know.